It's the other day, literally.
We are live talking that grits.
Where is everybody? I'm here. They woke up. Oh, please tell me what
Savory and
please
sweet.
tell me. Molly, I don't know. Can I me home?
Putting in work. Only thing in my sights. Putting in work. Whole day and all night. Putting in work. Only sleeping on flights. Putting in work. Put my back into it. I'ma use some extra muscle. Make them dance sweat. Simon says me shoot and shuffle. Move some bands to it. That's what I call flow or hustle. No kilograms, only bands. Single on shuffle. Supply demand. Get it advanced. Price just double. Expand the brand. That's the plan. Cause I need a couple niggas with a Rembrandts on hand. Yeah, we doing struggle. Floor plans and some land and some space. Putting in work. Only thing in my sights. Putting in work. Whole day and all night. Putting in work. Only sleeping on flights. Putting in work. Diversify the funds. Let me call it team huddle. On three. About to make it monsoon. Hell, I'm playing puddles. Going full throttle. We gon' need some seat buckles. What about the bigger picture? Pieces to the puzzle. Going on stop till it pop. Hold, bubble. Hold against the clock. Watch me get this triple double. Fight for my life. I'ma fight to the white knuckles. About to get this work off his clerk. I ain't here to put in work.
All right, we're listening to Mahogany Jones. That's her new single called Work. I think it came out top of this year, so I got to get her on the podcast. Yeah, but I'm in studio with Pilar Côté, NFT Evangelist, and also Khary Frazier.
What's going on?
Our proprietor for Detroit is different.
Yes,
It's a community resource. It is not me, said community.
Yeah, so with that, I just want to. So Khary is a big boss, and so he's got to go do some bossy stuff.
Hilarious.
But he gave us some really wonderful history about Ukraine. And first of all, go to the Detroit is Different channel on YouTube and check out. There's an entire series with Russ Ballant, and he breaks down, that entire series. And so shouts out to Always First Class Media, who's in the building. Yeah, we're gonna have a lively discussion. So okay, so I wanted to orient us though first. And I'm in a lot of different groups, and all these leftist groups that I'm in. And so I wanna orient us in this letter. There's a letter that's been written by the left, folks on the left that are in Lithuania. Actually, before I do that, let me go to Khary because Kari's got to go. And so I'll read the letter after. So Khary, go ahead and root us in the history that you were, just kind of settling us into. And like I said, to really dig into this history, go to the Detroit is Different YouTube channel and you can see it more in detail. But yeah, take it away, Khary.
All right. So one of Detroit is Different's other partners is Riverwise Magazine. If you're not picking up Riverwise Magazine, you're missing out on a lot of cool information, usually from the perspective of definitely progressive thought, activism, and also real cool artists too. So poetry, every issue has a real cool cover of artistry and so much more. And part of connecting to Riverwise is the Riverwise Podcast is produced via Detroit is Different. And now we launched into a YouTube page for Riverwise because I had a special interview with Russ Ballant. Russ Ballant is an author, also an activist and an anti-war activist that has written a lot about the conflict that does exist today. In studying this conflict that does exist today, there are a couple key things that hit home. And even from the interview I had with Russ Ballant, which I really felt like I was Ed Bradley or something on 60 Minutes, because I had to listen to the interview. After listening to the interview and making my chops of how I cut the video edits, I collaborated with a lot of his information, DuckDuckGo instead of Google, even though I think they kind of connected, but that's the search engine I usually use, especially with stuff like this. And I found out the relationship between the Ukraine and the Nazi regime, and also the relationship between what was recognized as communist or socialist Russia and the Ukraine as well. So to have a better understanding of what represented in this land, the Ukraine has kind of stood at a stance of polar opposite theories and thoughts of what would have been the leaning towards a Nazi influence and a socialist and communist influence of Russia, Nazi influence from what is Germany. At one point in time, this is really going back through history. So World War I, for any of you all that really study history, as far as I'm concerned, when I look at how it boils down, was a lot about colonization, but specifically and particularly the colonization of Africa. A lot of European nations felt left out and not getting their fair share of what resources from Africa they could get. People, gold, oil, natural gas, the same things that have been going on in Africa ever since, I don't know, the Western world has been introduced to Africa. So World War I was a huge explosion of what happened in reference to this. But during that time, you have, like, I guess what's honored as a world power of Russia, having a lot of influence on this whole region. What's different about Russia than many of the other nations there is Russia did not fall under the flag of Catholicism and Christianity like a lot of the other European states did. This has, I think, more to do with control and power than godliness in any realm of reality. So this is a Khary Frazier surmise, but I'm gonna always urge, as I did even in the interview with Russ, do your own research. 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 Don't believe me. Don't believe Piper. Don't believe Pilar. Don't believe the news. Don't believe Russ. Believe your damn self when you apply critical thinking. Okay. So with this, as we usher through this idea of this rule of the cloth, meaning the Pope and God, versus those outside of that, which fell under the realm of communism, which usually the argument against communism in a vacuum at one point in time was always those are godless people, those godless communists and socialist people. So this arc of thinking was the way that they otherized and dehumanized many of the Russians. And it also built the foundation for what became that call to action. At one point in time, you had a Russian premier. That Russian premier built this rhetoric. And that rhetoric was the premise that created the roots of what became the Nazi regime. And this whole idea of Aryan thought and the premise for what eugenics became in Europe, even though a lot of the birthplace of this whole eugenics movement comes back to America, as a lot of these
100%.
thoughts and ideals of even Nazism come from a lot of what was here in America to dehumanize and otherize our people, Black people, and the native people that were here. So I'm giving you this background because we have to look at the macro to even understand what's happening in the micro. World War I happens. During this shift of power in Russia, the shift of power moves towards socialism and communism. This unsettles a lot of things. Germany in World War I were seen as, like, I guess, the losers of World War I, which already built a lot of social angst, and many things changed in the German region. And those things that changed also had a lot of influence from what was labeled as you know, Ukraine at one point in time was part of Russia, but these Ukrainian nationals were kind of the first paramilitary group to fight behind Adolf Hitler. And World War II happens. So one of the key missions in World War II was to get back Russia, the Kremlin, take back Moscow. And it's seen through the lens of most American history. I know even me included, that World War II was when America went in and fought at the shores in D-Day. The reality is most of the war for World War II was fought in Russia. Defeating the Nazi regime was really in Russia's side. And Russia lost 30 million people in World War II. From there, after World War II, you have the collapse of the Nazi regime, and it was at one point in time like if we're both, we become friends just because we have the same enemy kind of thought process between Russia, Great Britain, and America. So you have Winston Churchill, you have Teddy Roosevelt, and you have Stalin, that all kind of come together under a compromise to fight against the Nazi regime, which is kind of weird because at the same time, America's was backing a lot of what was happening in Nazism. It's a known fact that to this day, one of the biggest people to sell out Madison Square Garden was Adolf Hitler. Like, I want to say he did it like 5 nights in a row. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't like way before World War II was going on. This was like World War II happens on Friday, last week. Adolf Hitler was marching down New York City with people, doing the Hail Hitler salute and selling out Madison Square Garden. You know what I'm saying? New York Knicks, Ringling Brothers, Adolf Hitler. This is American history. One of the key supporters that we know was Henry Ford, but along with Henry Ford, many Wall Street bankers bankrolled a lot of what happened with the Nazi regime. And this creates the shadows of what happens after World War II. So after World War II, we come to this idea of what United Nations is. The United Nations is a collection of nations so that it's like we can avoid international conflicts moving forward. So when the United Nations is formed, soon after you have another organization called NATO, this treaty alliance of many nations. But the whole concept of NATO was to stop USSR, Russia, but at one point in time, it was the USSR. It was the United States of these Russians, Ukraine included, from growing bigger. NATO's whole purpose was to look at toppling Russia or stopping aggression towards Russia, beating the Reds. This was the foundation of NATO. Upon the foundation of NATO, the first chairman of NATO was a Nazi general, Husinger. Damn, I had German in high school. Husinger, and you can find statues of him in the Ukraine. And you also find statues of so many other Nazis in the Ukraine, because it's always been kind of like a back and forth between Nazism and communism that has existed in Russia. That's why even before this, about a month ago, there was a vote on the UN floor of condemning Nazism moving forward. There were 2 nations that voted against this. And the 2 nations were the United States of America and the Ukraine. So as we're looking at some of these known neo-Nazis on news, but they're being painted as war heroes. And you can even track some of this stuff through Vice. A lot of the SS patches from the Nazi regime, a lot of the swastikas and paraphernalia, all worn by these Ukrainian nationals, and even some of the symbolism from apartheid, as Dylan Roof wore the apartheid patches when he shot up that church tragically, and they've also reconditioned or redone the Confederate flag here in America to be yellow and blue. So when you're looking at a lot of these Ukrainians being, I guess, aggressive or racist towards Africans, a lot of it is based and steeped in Nazism. And I'm definitely not saying that Russia is not steeped in white supremacy as well, because this is like a layered global fight, and it just looks different from different angles and different viewpoints. But we also need to recognize the alignment between what has always been a battle state, and that is the Ukraine. It's always been a fight. The same way, if like me, have family down south, it's a tension that exists with those sons and daughters of the Confederate Army, because their belief is a lot like some of these Ukrainian Nazis' belief. a lot of the belief of the sons and daughters of the Confederate Army believe that America was in a better place. And excuse my French right here. Their perspective is we had our niggers in control, and niggers didn't even know they needed a better life. And ever since you gave them freedom, they've been asking for more and more and more. You know, it's a tough discussion to have. I've been a truck driver, so damn near every nook and cranny, I've seen some good old boys in my day, you know, and I just welcome any discussion and discourse. So even the uncomfortable conversation I love to have, just so that I can get some perspective of it, whether I agree or disagree. I like to at least know the perspective. This is some of the same sentiments that you will hear from many of these Ukrainian nationalists. So they'll say, we hate Putin because he's a Jew. We don't like what's happening in communism because it's godlessness. We need our nation form back. So another thing to bring into point of this is NATO itself as an organization, kind of Russia, especially Vladimir Putin, has always taken the stance of NATO does not need to exist anymore. Hence the aggression in the thought process is NATO is America and America is NATO, you know, if that makes any sense from their perspective, because America is one of the key driving forces of what NATO has become. And an agreement was that brought down the Berlin Wall, and I'm a kid looking at David Hasselhoff sing, was built under the whole promise of you will not move any NATO bases further across any of these borders. It was honored at the time by Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, but by the time the USSR is toppled and things change, President Clinton's like, damn that, I'm not honoring any of those agreements. So what brought Germany together and was kind of heightened tensions is NATO. When you look at these maps, it looks like you're looking at maps where Russia's basically surrounding itself around the Ukraine. But then if you look at the maps and look at the NATO bases, it's surrounding itself actually around Russia. It's the flip reverse. And we're playing a game of propaganda and finding out information. And like I say, don't believe me for all of this. Do your own research, find out, and then look at body language, look at tonality, look at some of the aggressions, and then ask yourself, why are these Nazi statues still in Times Squares and altered in many of these places? You may ask yourself, why is a Thomas Jefferson statue in America too? But albeit, as I say, you know, these are things that we need to think about as we identify with what's happening. And it's definitely taking advantage of people by dehumanizing others, and a lot of confusion from a top-down level. Also, when you look at the president of Ukraine right now, I think is from Western world and American news looked at as like this beloved young guy that's out here fighting. He comes from a subset of teachings of many of these world leaders. So him, President Trudeau in Canada, what other world leaders come from this? Presidents in Argentina come from like this leadership council. Some of that leadership council is some of that same leadership council thought process and theory that gave us people like in Detroit, Robert Bob and stuff like that. These like weird think tank institutions that give us who our next leaders will be, all are interconnected. And that's why this man has so much wealth, how he's so interconnected, and what's intertwined in, even through what's recognized in Jewish faith through him, a lot of Nazism to be in the Ukraine. We need to be very aware of what's going to happen next, as America is in a position where I believe that our president is being exploited by people that always look to turn to war. So that military industrial complex, and also a huge distraction, as this is a Khary Frazier opinion, of one of the most inept presidencies we've ever seen. Not saying that I supported many as a black man in America. I don't support many presidencies, but looking at it from the lens of if I'm an American, not a black man in America, this is a very inept president. He doesn't really address the people. The country is still segmented. You still have people that are not. You still have a lot of uneasiness about everything, and many people are kind of looking like that ain't my war. and then others are still upset about other things.
Wait, so let me get
Here we go.
Pilar. Yeah, I'm gonna get Pilar in here to like respond to some of that, and then maybe like add on to what we were talking about earlier.
Wow, that was really deep. I just want to say it was very, very broad. I'm curious about the leader of Ukraine. I had read that he's also Jewish. Is that right? So,
Yes,
yeah,
he's
Can you-
also recognized. He's also
into that?
Jewish in faith.
right.
But see, this is the layers of even the Jewish people that helped the Nazi regime in Germany. Like some of these realities, like if I can use this to spin whatever this narrative is, I'm going to
Sure.
use that.
Sure.
So this is it's like so many layers to a lot of these conflicts. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And what goes on. But historically, I do believe that it's a lot of ego and
Of course.
people
of
feeling
course.
as though it's our birthright to have certain things.
But also too,
Right.
there's a difference between Judaism and Zionism. And so
There is a difference.
yeah, and so a lot of what folks identify as Jewish,
Mhm.
especially from Israel or this right wing, white supremacist Zionism. And
Mhm.
so the think tank that Khary was talking about and this rising white right that's been happening for the last it's always been here,
It's
but
always been
It's
here. It's
always
just
been here.
but the
It's been here
power-
for a minute.
this is the rebrand. It's like the rebranded white supremacy. It's like
it's
the new
like
Coke.
it's been growing in this kind of way.
Mhm.
Like let's call it like a neo
Yeah.
neo right wing white supremacy, like
Yeah.
the new Coke.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like a new brand on
You-
something that has always been here. And as we look at what this new brand is, it's unique because I think a lot of that is more like inner fighting. It's like an imploding of it. It's going to be more January 6th. It's going to be more people going to Governor Whitmer's door than even worrying about the black and brown problem. Like, not they still hate us, but the hate towards us is not as visceral as it is towards this broken leadership, because it goes back to when we were in control, we did not have problems like this. You started giving them freedom and started giving them rights, and it fucked everything up. And they keep asking for shit.
So there's a layer here that we often sort of, or it gets hidden. There's something that really gets hidden under, that label of white supremacy, right? Like that idea of white, like it's a label. It's not science. That's bona fide, not, it's made up. But and that's greed, right? And so we have these structures all over the world, entire infrastructures built on this idea of hoarding, right? Hoarding resources and marginalizing or like blocking access to resources and whatnot for certain groups of people based on their skin color, right? When you look at you mentioned something that was really interesting, that the US having very, like, a lot of origins of that racism and white supremacy, and a lot of people I don't think are aware that I believe it was 1683 1683, or was it 1863? It might have been 1863. There was one woman. So at that time in the US we had slavery, and like, it was still law. And a woman, but at that time, if your parents were European, specifically if your father was European, then you, by law, were considered European. So an abolitionist, which is somebody that fights against slavery from Europe, I believe he was from the UK, he's an attorney. He meets this woman. Her father is a slave owner, a European man, and her mother is a slave. And so they befriend each other, and he wants to get her out of slavery. He wants to help free her. He's an abolitionist, and he wants to go through the courts. So they go through the court system, and they stipulate, but her father is a European. Since her father is a European, then she is a European. And by law, a European cannot be enslaved. She gained her freedom. She's the only slave in the United States of America that gained her freedom that way. As soon as she gained her freedom, everybody, like the courts, like slave owners went kind of crazy, and they were like, well, we can't have this. We can't have slaves being freed because their fathers are rapists, right? You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. So they changed the laws, and they created the word white. That was when the word white was created, the label white. And only if you were deemed white under the white label could you be free. Only if you were deemed under the white label could you have naturalization, like be a citizen of the United States of America. Only if you were deemed white under that label could you have ownership, could you own land and people. And only if you were a white man could you, have access sexually to anyone you wanted. White women were not permitted to have sex with anyone other than white labeled men, right? And that was law. So that's like the beginnings of, the idea of race, right? And
even before that, though, like leading up to that, because in
like
this,
legally speaking, like where it was written
legally,
into law.
It began with the justification of enslavement and otherism.
Of course.
We're not Christian.
Right.
But there were so many other slave uprisings around the fact of like certain places where there were so many outnumbered enslaved people, welcoming in people through the cloth of Christianity. And this is not to make anyone get in their feelings, because in my mind and my ideals of morality, just due to how I was raised, Christianity is my moral compass. I am understanding of the Coptic religion of Christianity, but within it, I also am understanding that religion has been one of the tools of using influence and mind control historically, and that's Judaism, Islam,
and it has
Buddhism, Christianity. So like so much of this is the vehicles of people. So like at first it was that
colonialism.
I mean, it's been a tool of
like
oppression.
It's been weaponized.
It's been a tool of oppression almost like since the beginning. So I would and as this is happening, like you even see the scene in like when you talk about whatever, but the scene in Django where Leonardo DiCaprio takes the skull and he's like, this nigger's head is da-da-da-da-da. Like there was a whole subset of what we regard as the highest forms of science, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, like
Darwin theory.
All of this was based on the whole concept of like black people are more we have no souls. We have like this was like it was like running parallel, like
it's not a was though, because those are the basis of the current teachings in science classes at the highest level of so-called university.
I agree. I mean, I'm just saying like, but at the was, I'm saying was like it's running concurrent. That creates the whole concept of what whiteness is. And what's so strange about even whiteness itself is that's what makes things so strange, because even inside whiteness, there is a hierarchy and caste system of what whiteness is.
Because it's just a label. It's not science. Like it's not human genetics. It's not real. That's why there can be a hierarchy. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's not real. It's fabricated.
Yeah, but even when we think of the gangsterism of what America represents, these were vagrants, thieves, outcasted, religious extremists, like the quote unquote settlers here. And the George Washingtons and the Thomas Jeffersons, even of the quote unquote forms of like what's labeled as true whiteness, and that's the Germanic, the English, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, but like the Irish, the Scottish, the Polish, the Serbian, the Russian, there is in this system of what becomes whiteness and like what encompasses things. One of the whole concepts and the ideals is the American propaganda that has always existed. But the design of this nation was always for white men that own businesses and property. So
let's go back to that first point you made though. Because you made a statement here that had me and Pilar's ears like perked really up, and it was around the concept of Nazism, which is an American idea,
yes,
and is created in America. Can you touch back, or either one of you, like touch back on, because you were saying earlier, and I don't remember if we said it on air or not, but you were speaking earlier about how I'm going to paraphrase your discomfort with trying to frame the political situation as Ukraine being a victim is difficult for you because of their roots, their Nazi roots. And I might be speaking for you, so just correct me.
So it's like anything that when we're dealing with people, it's layers. Because even a lot of the people in the Nazi Guard, like, you know, it's some horrific shit that people can do when conditioned, when they think less. But part of our minds and our ideals to dehumanize another is already our insecurities of how dehumanized we feel. And you paint a picture of whoever this oppressor or the reason why not. So I'm definitely not, it definitely sounds like I'm empathizing with hate, and I'm not doing it. I'm just having somewhat of a basis and an understanding of where it comes from. So a lot of what's happening now is definitely hard to shed a tear and put up the Ukraine flag, because a lot of our understanding for empathy and humanity and how things happen and what we should care about and what we shouldn't care about is under the guise of certain conditioning that doesn't go back to heightening quality of life for people itself, because it's through a premise and a lens. So when I speak of white supremacy, it's through a lens of the fear and insecurity and self-control that because they lack the melanated spirits, they lack the creativity, they lack the true understanding and love and abundance that we think of life. So the whole concept. So, and when I say they, it's not even all quote unquote white people. It could be even a quote unquote black person subscribing to this. Like,
and some do.
African,
some of us do.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
African spirits, Africa was abundant with resources.
You don't
think in the form of scarcity.
It's right, and it still is. It's very rich. It's very rich in
it's
resources.
Been stripped and stolen, and right now in 2050, it'll be more people. Nigeria will have more people than China by 2050. You need to know that. And great technology, great resources, many things that are abundant. But at the same time, what my point that I'm getting at is this idea of scarcity is rooted in the whole concept of being in a place that makes you look at things being so scarce. The Viking nations, even the way his story is written, is exalting violence, exalting war, exalting
it's
pain,
rooted. So history
weaponism.
Is rooted in war. All the markers of let me say this. All the markers that are taught, the way history is taught, is all the markers are the points of European conquest.
Yes, his story, and even the way Europeans look to comedic abundance and these ideas of the pyramids and the statues and what comedic science means. It's or Mansa Musa in the legions of Mali. but the meditative spirits of Dogon Nation, living with as a Maasai warrior, and what being a Maasai warrior and fending for a family is not exalted in this lens, because this lens is like, look at this big ass Sphinx. That's some shit to honor because it's big as hell. You know, the Colosseum is big as hell. It's like, it's through a lens of his story. And even in his story, there are other things of peace, of community, of collectivism, of giving back, of coming together, but it's never going to be exalted. You know, so like I see a Putin, I see a Biden the same way I see a Elon Musk or a Bill Gates. It's like it's in the same framework, but just from a different lens. So, you know.
Yeah, I have a question to that, because I would want to clarify that you're not supporting war, right? Like, you're being very clear about that. It's it's not support for war, but it is, and if I get this right, there is an understanding that, and perhaps, let me just ask this, is it possible that Russia, or maybe Putin, is using the excuse of the existence of, white supremacy, Nazism, the excuse of the existence of Nazism, because Nazism doesn't just exist there. It exists in many places across the world. But the excuse of that, the existence of that being there for whatever levels, at whatever levels, or for whatever reason, is it possible that he's utilizing that as an excuse to be able to, or just not to be able to, because he can do what he wants, but to go in and deploy, war against a nation that he really is, his fear or his concern really comes down to territorial markings because of NATO, because that is like a NATO, that is like a NATO hub. It's a necessary hub in terms of power, like world powers, in terms of like war strategies, right?
Capitalist power,
right? If we're talking about, right, like we're talking about that big picture strategy, and that being a hub for them, and them aligning more and more with NATO and with NATO nations, and them almost, didn't they just come into NATO last year or recently, like in the last, right? And so could that be a possibility?
It's definitely
what
that.
I mean? Like,
I would say it's definitely that, and I would also say, like, when we're talking about this, yes, I do not support violence or war in any manner.
Of course.
Now, with this, and I know it definitely sounds like I'm being a hypocrite when I say this, is the same way I'm a business person. Like, business is war. Like, I'm in this system that has reconditioned. I have to pick and choose where my humanity can rise and where it doesn't rise.
Like zero sum. If you
not,
have, I don't. If I have, you don't. Rather than we can share.
I sometimes can be in that, but like, it's a lot of gray area here. Like, I'm from a hood where violence can occur, and I understand it, and I'm not justifying it, but I know the context of it. You know what I'm saying? It shouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, he shot him because he stepped on his sneakers, but it's like, okay, you don't know the layers. I just was having a discussion with somebody. I got homeboys that done served a lot of time in different jails together, and I don't know a lot about y'all, but my homeboys, that, like, prison is a community within itself, and they talk, and it's a different connection from being incarcerated together, where sometimes shit spark off and somebody kills somebody. And it's one of those things where I don't want to see it, but I also am not going to be the person to intervene and be like, look, brother, you need to put the gun down, because I live in a reality where war has now been justified through the conditioning that I'm shaking myself out of, let alone to expand to others. So what I would say is, if you are in a position, if you're in a position of any form of leadership, this is Putin, this is Saddam Hussein, this is Muammar Gaddafi, this is Fidel Castro. As vicious as America may make a person seem, it's a lot of people that are supporting you if you can take action. So the Russian people are supporting him, and the Russian people that are supporting him because, like I say, that eastern bloc of the Ukraine is really, even though it's in the Ukraine, it's Russian. So it's like, as these Ukrainian National Guardsmen are beating the shit out of these people that have Russian leaning, you have to do something Because how many of those messages are you going to get from your soldiers that are Russian and saying, yo, this is fucked up, man. They're beating the shit out of my uncle, bro.
Yeah,
like if
it's
I'm in
my
a
family
gang
on that
and you in a
side.
gang,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like I'm in a gang, you in a gang, but we selling drugs together and everything. But for whatever reason, my gang keeps fucking with your guys.
Because that
It's going to get to a certain point where you're going to be like, look, I want to keep doing business with you, but my guys are to a point where I have to do something about this, because you obviously can't control your men, because really it's America putting the battery in the back of Ukraine, being like, look, whatever you do, like, look, if you can stop selling drugs with Khary and I'll give you the drugs you need. And I kind of like that you fucking up. You know what I'm saying? Doing wild shit. Like, it's a reason why the first person that led NATO was Nazi. It's a reason why in Syria you had Nazi generals that were working with the CIA. It's a reason why you have the what is that? The Democracy Now radio frequency that was going out and throughout Russia. This whole propaganda wing about what Russia is and what things are going on. Like, these are intentional forms of espionage. And as we even found out through the Black Panthers, espionage is less a motherfucker like James Bond sitting around with a martini, macking on women. It's more like, if I can bring enough confusion, even amongst the three of us, then that makes Piper kind of look at me sideways. That makes me look at Pilar sideways. And the espionage person, it becomes, instead of the Piper Carter podcast, the CIA podcast. Because CIA now is buddied up with everybody. Like, hey, did you know what Piper said about you? All right, man, I don't want to say nothing.
The strategy of distrust.
Exactly. And that same dissension, what they did to Garvey, what they did to the Panthers, what they did to Martin Luther King. I mean, it's shocking to think about. And I mean, like they even talk about Baynard Rustin to this day as like, look at this great civil rights Black leader, but he was an FBI informant. Like, when you look at that FBI files of Martin Luther King, it's like, in Martin Luther King's office, though definitely he was, cheating on his wife or whatever, but you had, of his office of 50 people, 30 of them were FBI agents. You know what I'm saying? So that's just the type of thought process where it's a reason like that like the access points and the ways that America is like, nah, we ain't got troops on the ground, but we're causing enough ruckus and confusion and madness to make things switch at a point where things don't, where it's so uneasy, the war in Afghanistan, like, it runs concurrent with the opioid crisis. And then it's like, obviously the biggest producer of poppy in the world is Afghanistan. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, let's also talk about, because you mentioned drugs. Well, let's also talk about how Russia, Ukraine are the top CIA like hitmen hired there, created there. When the stories about how the citizens were taking up arms, they were taking up arms with AR-15s that were supplied by the US. And I don't mean in the 60s. I'm talking about like the day before yesterday.
Yesterday.
This is right, but this is okay. So we have in the US, we have a very deep, very profitable weapons system. Like, we produce weapons for the world. Those people that run those companies, that own those companies, right? Those capitalists, they need wars to exist in order to continue to profit. It benefits them to have, right? So of course, deals are going to be bartered. Right? Deals are going to, it's like, oh, we can supply Kiev with, this many weapons. We can send Ukraine, do you know what I mean? All these weapons. Do you know what I mean? Because somebody's got to buy them. Somebody's going to pay for them. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so this is like that capitalist mentality of like, how can I profit from war? How can I edge and be around for these, tipping points that happen, right? And be ready to, what's the word? That strategy of distrust that we were talking about.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. The key weapon in America has always been propaganda.
Right.
It's always been it's like it's always been propaganda, but this is
but for profit though, like to be able to sit there and see that there's some stuff going on between Russia and Ukraine, and you just wait until there's like that little bit of like you throw in some weapons and you hear that these people, you know, this person hears that these people are getting weaponized, right, that they're getting ready and that they're, you know, whatever, and then this person starts putting more people around the borders getting ready, and then you're just like, I don't know, and then these guys are like, I can't wait because I'm going to sell more weapons, like this is about to go off.
I would say
wait, but also too throw in there that gas in that gas in Cali is like $7
because
a gallon.
Russia's one of the biggest, if not the biggest producer of oil, of crude oil, so of course it's profitable.
But I would say,
you know what I mean,
I would say
this is profit everywhere. It's profit everywhere.
I would say it's like a pie. So some of it's the profit, some of it's just the thought process. We want our shit back.
Of course.
Some of it's the thought process of like, I can bully somebody, so shit, I'm gonna bully somebody. And some of it is like rock and hard place of like, this is the way of the Western world, like this is what we do. But and then what's crazy about it is, you know, I don't know, what's that? Art of War, Sun Tzu. Like at the end of the wars never went on the battlefield. No. It's gonna always be some people getting on the phone, being like, hey, this shit's a wrap. It's never, you know, it's never to the point where everyone, quote unquote, is murdered. It's always going to be some form of dignitaries deciding what happens. And then when those dignitaries decide what happens, the same way, like, you know, when we were in school and our teachers break us up from a fight at recess, that shit's still kind of lingering on the bus. Sure. And that shit been lingering on the bus since World War I. That's what I'm saying. So it's like these treaties still never really resolve the conflict. The Japanese people do business with America. They you know, welcome American money and all that. But the minute that the Japanese people have an edge where they can kick America's ass, they will do it in a minute. Just like the minute that after, you know what I'm saying? You ever, a teacher ever break up a fight and somebody get a lick in on you, like, damn, you know what I'm saying? Like right at the end, where it's like, damn, you got that lick in on me. Right there. But the minute I can get a lick back in on them.
But really, like, really the root here, though, out of all of this, and just continuously throughout past history and into like to here, and I'm talking about not I'm excluding indigenous cultures because they function differently, but what we're talking about here and the way globally the way things, the power structure functions is really on ego and greed. Right, it's really about ego and hoarding, ego and greed, and that's part really of that, the root of that.
But I would drill that down further. Of it's the insecurity to trust in collectivism, because to trust in collectivism means that now I have to bring something to I have to feel share. As though that what I bring to the pot will be just as welcome as what they bring to the pot.
Right, and you have to share. And people don't want to share, like people in power.
But I would say that's the insecurity of feeling that it will be shared. Like, it's so weird because it's like, it's the insecurity that if we're all on the same playing field, then nobody's going to want to play with me. I need some form of leverage just so that I can have a friend. Now, I'm definitely surmising this like down to some old Sesame Street Gumby shit, but that's my interpretation, so I can move forward and not be crippled throughout my day and, you know, walk up on, you know, every white person and smack them in the face type shit, because it's definitely not even the whiteness that you speak of is way more an ideal.
It's completely
than it's even anything, and even that ideal is in me because I've been conditioned in this same shit.
Even my condition is conditioned.
My conditioning.
It's full indoctrination, right?
Yes.
Like we're all indoctrinated into this system. Like our school system, all of it it's very indoctrinating. That's.
Wait, let's talk about what the well, I'm gonna say indoctrination or into crypto. So. Because I definitely want to.
Y'all been kicking it. I gotta edit. It's been dope. I'm gonna come back. We'll talk more international diplomacy from Khary's perspective with Pilar and Piper. But like I say, watch Riverwise. Do your own damn research. That's the root of a lot of this shit, the propaganda. And even this, your favorite thing of TikTok. You know who controls that. Handle yours.
Our proprietor of Detroit is different, Khary Frazier, gonna go do some boss type editing stuff. But Pilar, yeah, speaking of, shifting power, you're always coming on our show and always on Clubhouse and in the world, helping people to shift power. But I wanted you to speak a little bit because you shared some information with me, and I want you to share it.
Sure. Something that I thought was really interesting. 2-3 days ago, I was on Twitter and I come across this tweet. It had like a few likes, you know what I mean? It was just, but I read it and I was like, wow, it was so powerful. I'm going to read it for you. So it's by Artyom Fedosov. Fedosov. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but he's at Sleepwalker. That's his handle. My Ukrainian credit cards don't work anymore. I'm safe physically in Kazakhstan, but all my savings are gone. Crypto is the only money I still have. And today I can say without exaggeration that BTC, that's Bitcoin, ETH, that's Ethereum, and NFTs are going to save my life while I can't come back home. And I thought that was, wow, so powerful to think that you've been forcibly removed from your home, forced to flee because of a war that you can't affect. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not the one making these decisions. You happen to have some crypto because over the last, whatever, a few years, maybe he's been in it for 5 years, who knows, he's managed to accumulate a little bit of crypto. But anything that he had of value, home-wise or whatnot, is not accessible. You can't carry the things you own, even the wealth, even like 20 watches. Like, how many things can you carry on your back when you're fleeing, right? Like, I mean, this is war. You're literally the clothes on your back and maybe 1 or 2 things in your hands, and that's it. That's your future is that for who knows how long, because you don't know. And who knows if when you do go back, the building where your home was isn't bombed and there's nothing to come back to in terms of the life you had, the day before you left, right? So it's really interesting that in this moment, something like cryptocurrency could be utilized as a lifeline. And I thought that was fascinating. And I checked today, and that has been retweeted over 17,000 times. And it now has over 80,000 likes. And I think it's just a really fascinating use case, as horrific and sad as the situation that created that. It kind of speaks to, how we're moving towards this new future, towards this, can we build something different? Can we build a new future, something that has more access, more equity, more justice built in, right? And just more, what's the word I'm looking for? More ownership of your data and self-direction and all of that, with decentralization, with Web3, right? And to see that use case in a situation of war where this person would literally be starving, right? Or close to it, or be thinking on those terms, like, am I going to eat today? What can I do to be able to eat today in wherever I've landed? Do you know what I mean? Compared to, I have some Bitcoin or I have some ETH and I can buy food with it somewhere.
Now, so speaking of Bitcoin,
it's interesting
because Bitcoin is centralized.
Right. But it is a part of Web3, right? So because it's a part of Web3, it and the structures that are being built for being able to access it, and being able to use it, or let's say trade it for food, for a pair of shoes, for you need a jacket because it's colder where you've just moved, something like that. that is possible outside of traditional banking systems, which are Web 2 analog systems, where if the government shuts down the banking system, you're shit out of luck, like this guy, right? Like, sorry, but I shouldn't speak like that, but like do you know what I mean? Like, you have no access, right? Your bank account is closed. It's done. Like, there's no access, right? But yeah, being able to access Web3, right, systems, it's very interesting to me. I was like, wow, because it also speaks to some of the blockchains that are creating, like Cardano, for example, and I think of them because they are one of the ones that have been speaking to this type of issue from the get-go of why they're creating, or why they've created Cardano and why it's being built out, is to give banking access to places in the world where banking has never existed. It just, you know what I mean? Like places in African countries, distant places all over the world, Latin American countries where banking just is not accessible, and predominantly to people of color, and predominantly to people with low incomes, right? Being able to trade, being able to monetize things, being able to access microloans, even to begin businesses, do you know what I mean? Like loans, grants, what have you, that just doesn't exist. That possibility isn't there. It's just, nada, right? So to see this just spoke to me on those terms, like, wow, in a situation of war, as egregious as that is, as horrific as you would never want anyone to have to even be in his circumstance, it's almost like a proof case. Do you know what I mean? It like verifies in some ways that is the kind of access that can be had in those places where women, for example, women and girls make up 51% of the planet. I mean, today is like the first day of Women's History Month, right? We make up 51% of the planet, and we are the largest group of the most poor, the ones with the least access to education, justice, safety, ownership, wealth.
Can I just jump in there for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the situation that's going on in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
the Africans, many of the Africans or Nigerians that were denied access into Poland, right? What we've learned.
Wait, from Ukraine? Yeah, from Ukraine?
Yeah, from
Okay.
Ukraine.
Okay.
So what the conversation has been is a race conversation, which I think is extremely important.
Yeah.
Layered with that, as you're speaking, is that Black bodies
Yep.
are commodity,
100%.
and the what would I call it? The industry of the sex trade, or
Yeah.
the sex slave trade.
Yeah.
That is huge.
Yeah.
In the Ukraine and Russia, and
Like Eastern European, that is, yeah, it is a hotspot for actually for extracting slaves, and it is also a hotspot for moving slaves, brown bodies, from Latin American countries and African countries into European countries through like those rings. Yeah.
yeah, and so I wanted to kind of shift the conversation a little bit into what you were describing earlier, the situation that is going on currently.
Yeah. So yeah, we think about this because it is this month, and we get to think about it the entire year, you and I. But with this month specifically, a lot of things are highlighted, and we were saying how it terrified me to hear that this war was going to kick off, and then once it actually kicked off and it went into full tilt, all I could think about was it's that same sentiment when Afghanistan fell, and everyone left Afghanistan, and the women and girls were left there. The terror, right? Like, it's this internal terror of like, oh my goodness, what, what's coming. Do you know what I mean? Like, what is coming. The horrors that are coming into by force into the lives of women and girls, predominantly girls, because younger is the more in demand population. But with Ukraine too, I've read it over and over again. People saying their first instinct was to get their daughters out of that country once war was was coming, and once it did begin, they were just like frantic to get their daughters out. And I have a girlfriend who has godchildren there, and they just went into 3 weeks underground in a bomb shelter. And the reality that she has to endure, where will she ever see that family again? What's going to happen? You know what I mean? All these uncertainties, and any girl children in that country are in deep danger. Someone else that is from there, that has family there and is from that country specifically, was in a thread I'm in, and he was very specific about how cruel and vicious the Russians will be, and in this, and it won't be documented, it won't be publicized, but they are extraordinarily cruel, extraordinarily vicious. So yeah, it's terrifying, because that is the cause of war, right? Sex traffickers, they look for crises like this, displacement, unparented, unwatched, torn apart children, like, torn apart from families, all of that. Perfect victims. Just go in and you just steal humans, right, into the slave trade. So yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I'm like, we have to have another. Well, so April, I'm gonna dedicate the month. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to dedicate the whole month to sexual assault awareness, because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, or if I'm going to split it up between Sexual Assault Awareness Series and political education, because we have the elections coming up. I may push political education to May, but I don't want to like save this conversation for April. I definitely
Right.
want to have it now, because again, both yourself, myself, shouts out to Kalima and a lot of other people, definitely are work on this issue consistently. And yeah, I think when we come back, we really need to look for and have some tangible ways that folks can support people who are, victims of sex trafficking, especially right now. It's chaotic, and like you said, it's easy for, in all the chaos, for people to get lost in the shuffle. So that's a mild way to put it.
Organized crime looks for that, like that they're do you know what I mean? Like that's their meal ticket, right? And in the same way that they look for like the foster care system, it's the same thing. There's nobody in the corner of those girls. Do you know what I mean? Nobody paying attention, if you will. Easy pickings, the disappeared, right, all over the place. And that is also why brown and black women and girls are the most targeted, because the justice systems aren't going to look for them. They're not going to hold anyone accountable. Like, being a woman, the chances of accountability going in your favor are low, but your skin color makes it near impossible to ever gain justice, ever gain accountability. It just it's an unfortunate truth.
I definitely also just want to highlight, having worked in the fashion industry, the fashion industry, I mean, is a violator of many atrocities.
Cesspool.
And if we're looking at within the fashion industry, if we're talking about the modeling aspect or the modeling industry, fashion is a place where human trafficking is part of the business model, if you will.
100%.
So the models are scouted when they're like 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
Many of them come from Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
Many of the young girls are like 6 feet tall when they're like 11 or 12. And many of these modeling agencies pawn off the models or the potential models to clients. I'm gonna put the quotes on clients, but anything from your typical Wall Street, mogul to a celebrity to a any sort of businessman overseas, but
sexual predators and pedophiles. Yes.
Yeah. And so when we look at I don't know if folks have ever watched any of the Epstein documentaries or anything like that, but this is that world. This is where that world is right now. 100%. And that's a conversation that's not happening. Trust me, war is super scary. What I believe is that the media is pushing certain narrative to actually get folks' minds and hearts to support war. But I think what I would like to do is have conversations about the conversations that don't happen, right? Like the Africans who are, sex trafficked, and how that's a huge problem.
It's huge.
Globally, but definitely in Eastern Europe, where I would say they're pretty much the kings of human trafficking and sex trafficking, especially with minors, like you said, and also how the fashion industry has pretty much cornered the market on child sex slavery through the model industry.
Yeah.
And it's not. Not to differentiate
it's facilitated through the modeling. Yeah.
It's and cleaned up, right? It's cleaned up, and not that it doesn't happen in the porn world, right? Or not that porn isn't a part of this, but I think what happens sometimes is in these conversations when folks talk about porn, they kind of separate porn like this Ron Jeremy kind of thing, right?
Like it's some separate thing, and it's like, no, it's one and the same. Like what people don't really understand, and we're not taught this as young people, is that porn is literally the advertisement of prostitution. It is the filmed version of prostitution, right? They go hand in hand, right? So slavery is the crux, the foundation of prostitution, just like slavery is the foundation of pornography. It's the same system, right? It is a system of slavery. It was born from slavery, and it has never existed without slavery. You know what I mean? Like it cannot exist without slavery. It's an impossible thing for that whole industry, that whole system to exist without slavery.
And what's interesting too is the media's avoidance of the conversation about how prevalent the sex trade is in this region, and how this is a moment where much of that needs to be discussed, right? Over and over and over again. I really want to
there's something I want to highlight too, because like what you're saying right now regarding the media and everything, we have to understand that this is very, very organized crime. This is like the highest levels of organized crime, being able to move human beings within days, you know what I mean, to different parts of the planet, not like neighborhoods, you know what I mean, like, within 2 days you can get somebody to another neighborhood or down the highway to maybe the next town. No, like globally, like they're here in Detroit today, in 2 days they're in another country. Do you know what I mean? Like in 5 days they're on another continent. Do you know what I mean? And they'll never be back. Like they're gone forever. They could be here and then in Dubai next week, or within like a few days. Do you know what I mean? Like here and in Germany, within a few days, like here, and you know what I mean? Like it's
And I definitely, I want to highlight how the conversation in the media is that all these Western nations are quiet,
oh right.
but they're quiet because they're complicit, right? They're
There's a lot of
complicit with this
profit.
war. There's a lot of profit going on with this war or with this impending war. And there's a lot of profit going on with the human trafficking and the sex trade and the child sex trade. And truth be
as
told,
the offshoot of weapons, the profit in weapons, that offshoot of that whole thing, that the chaos and the destruction and the fleeing of humans, the migration of humans, all of that is just like easy pickings for all those, for organized crime to come in and be like, we're profiting off of guns and now we're profiting off of bodies.
yeah. And we talked earlier about the what do we call it, like the center of espionage is there as well. It is the center of the highest forms of high crimes and secret crimes, and yeah, and when I say the US's hand in all of that, and how the US is making money currently off of all of that, while while making it appear as though they're just so separated and not a part of that, and we're over here in the civilized West and we're so confused as to what's happening. Again, meanwhile, the gangs in Ukraine actually, have AR-15s that have been passed out by the US. And while I'm definitely pro guerrilla warfare, it's just my heart goes to the citizens in Ukraine and Russia and the entire region, right?
Yeah.
That are impacted
Many
by
Russians
all these
are
decisions.
right. Many Russians have been very vocal that they are against this. I mean, I think the majority of people in those areas, they don't want war. The majority of people on our planet do not want war. However, the majority of people on the planet do not profit from weapon sales and do not make decisions at the highest levels of government, right? And officiating. So we're pawns, right? We are at the whim of greed and ego, literally, right? And so it's sad right now in Russia. Thousands, I think it was like 4,000 people have been arrested for protesting against their country's actions. And they really are very controlling about anyone in disagreement of Russian government in period there. I mean, you're incarcerated and who knows what happens to you in those jails.
Yeah, and moving forward, we're gonna see, right? What they show us, right? But I feel like we've been talking for a while, and I want to continue this conversation and more as we see, what actually will unfold. But I want folks to go check you out on Clubhouse to learn more about NFTs and crypto art and all the great stuff that you have coming up. So tell everyone how and where they can find you.
Sure. So I'm a part of searchlight.art. You can see us there. We curate all kinds of events. We're partnering up this month with a few groups, women's groups, to create We the Women NFT art exhibition. And the deadline is March 8th for art to submit a piece. Around the idea of like how women thrive, resistance, resilience, all of that, joy and greatness and achievement of women, anything to do with that. And the show will launch in spatial.io. It's a VR gallery type space, and it's a really great sort of universe you can enter. But it's a VR gallery that we'll be building for the show, and it'll be up for a year. So you can go to searchlight.art. You can go to my Twitter at Pilar Côté and get the links to submit if you're interested. It should be the first pinned tweet.
Yeah, and just so folks who don't know what a VR gallery is, can you tell them what that is?
So it's a virtual gallery, so that instead of going to a physical place, you go into a like a website, like a space on a website, and you can enter it with VR headsets, like virtual reality headsets, to see things like really very realistic and very, it's like you're really there and moving around. Or you can have it on your web browser, just on your screen, and maneuver around with a mouse and some keys, whatever you want to do. Either way, it's accessible, but you can go in from anywhere in the world where you have access to the internet. Of course, the digital divide is a real thing in some places, but if you do have access to internet, you can access it from anywhere in the world. Spatial.io, and it'll be called We the Women. Yeah,
and we'll make sure it's put down in the chat. I mean, in the description of this.
Can I mention one more? Sorry. And I have a standing show that kicked off last December on Human Rights Day, and it's still going to the end of this month and probably a few more months after. I'm going to leave it up, but it's also in spatial.io, but you can get the link to it in searchlight.art. It's called Momentum is Ours. And it is an art exhibit speaking against against gender violence, so ending violence against women and girls. And it was an alignment with the United Nations projects and initiative to end violence against women and girls. So that's still up if you're interested in looking at that.
Yeah, thank you. And also too, in Detroit, if you are in Detroit, I had to put my glasses on so I can see the flyer. I turned 50 a couple weeks ago, but it's the International Day of Women as well in Clark Park. Shouts out to Garaje Cultural, which is Amelia Duran. She organized a rally and a protest. It's going to be at 4:30 p.m. In Clark Park on March the 8th. And there's an art build that's happening this Friday, the 4th, from 4 p.m. To 8 p.m. at 4670 Junction. That's in Southwest Detroit. If you don't know about Garaje Cultural, it's a wonderful space that our beloved sister, Amelia Duran, has, been building. They've just secured a new building.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so everyone come out and supports. Should be super incredible. And then also too, definitely, keep listening to Piper Carter Podcast. You can go to the website now that we have a website, pipercarterpodcast.com. I'm on Clubhouse. I need to get on there more with Pilar.
Yes.
And at Piper Carter, if you go to the Instagram, it's Piper Carter Podcast. And if you go to Facebook, it's Piper Carter Podcast. And please join us in our Facebook group or our Meta group, Piper Carter Podcast. That's where we continue the conversation. We're on the Detroit is Different podcast network. Shouts out to Khary Frazier, who's invested in this wonderful space for the community. You can go to detroitisdifferent.net to see all the other podcasts that are available on the network, or you could go to detroitisdifferent.com and read the blog and catch up on all things Detroit. And definitely on social media, Detroit is Different on Facebook and Detroit is Different on Instagram. So this has been the Piper Carter Podcast. Thank you, Pilar, for being wonderful and incredible. Definitely want to also shout out Brittany March and also Deja Gray, who were not able to be here this evening, but we really appreciate them. Oh, and before I go, just a reminder, the music that you heard at the top of the episode is Mahogany Jones. All of her links are inside of the description, but you want to go to Mahogany Jones on Instagram and Facebook and all the places that you can listen to music. And the song that we played today is her new song, came out this year, brand new. It's called Work. All right. And you guys have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you so much, Piper. Thank you.
Peace.
Take care.